In this episode of 45 terabyte Linux NAS, VLC on Android, and 2010's top 5 Linux stories. You're listening to Linux News Log, separating the Linux and open source signal from the noise, a proud member of techpodcasts.com. Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm your host Adrian, coming to you almost live from lovely Phoenix, Arizona, here in Studio C1 at QuickSurf Internet Media. Linux News Log is a proud member of the Tech Podcast Network. If it's tech, it's here. Do feel free to head on over to techpodcast.com and check out all the other technology-related shows over there. This is the last show of 2010. We're on season 11, episode 19. I was really hoping to finish the year off with the last season the last episode for the 11th season, but it didn't quite work out that way. We had a couple of weeks off in October and November due to just family being in town and just life happening, and so we're gonna go ahead and finish this year off. It's been a really light news week. The last couple weeks actually have been really light, so I've attempted to assemble some things that the inner Linux geek in us can certainly appreciate, but it won't be that full of an episode. So with that, let's go ahead and get into what I've got, and let's go talk about it. From linuxdevices.com, I saw this. Actually, I saw this when I was searching for news for my other show, The Geekinator, and I noticed that it's Linux based, so I said, hey, that's perfect for a Linux news log. So anyway, the company that makes this, Synology, it's a Linux based NAS. It supports up to 45 terabytes of storage. You can put 3 terabyte drives in it. The base unit it comes with 5 bays, and you can daisy chain additional bays on for a total of 45 terabytes of network attached storage. It comes with the requisite VGA port, USB 2.0 ports, dual gigabit LAN ports, an eSATA port. It's essentially a pretty hefty, network attached storage device. It's, you can pretty much treat it like a small Linux based computer. It does RAID and all that good stuff. The product is the DS1511. The manufacturer Synology. Comes with an unspecified 1.8 gigahertz dual core CPU. We don't know what the chipset is. It has a gig of RAM in it. You can expand it to 3 gigs if you so desire. You have 5 hot swappable bays for 2.5-inch or 3.5-inch SATA drives, and dual eSATA ports for external expansion units. You can support up to an additional 10 drives, 2 gigabit Ethernet, 4 USB 2.0, and 1 VGA port. The power consumption is about 68 watts, so it's basically a low-end desktop computer. It's not bad. And it's just under 9.5 pounds. So pretty neat stuff. It's about $900 without the drive, so you are basically getting a really small form factor, low-end computer. That has, specialized software for network file storage, but still, nonetheless, I thought it was interesting, and I figured I'd share it with all of you. From Electronist, one of the few actual news stories that we have this episode, the Russian government plans switch to GNU Linux software. The Russian government is planning to transition its computer infrastructure to take advantage of free and open source software such as Linux. The move, which was reportedly signed by Prime Minister Vladimir Putin, will affect a wide range of agencies and other bodies that are directly controlled by the federal government. So, there's obviously a lot of moving parts in play with a switch such as this, so I would expect it to take years for them to actually make the transition. But, it's interesting that they've decided to try to leverage Linux and open source in a way that helps them save some money. From Android Central, this is another news story. VLC Media Player set to arrive on Android in early 2011. This is kind of neat. For those of you who are on Linux, the only way to watch all kinds of video out there is with Video LAN Client, otherwise known as VLC. excuse me. And they are, and VLC is making an app for Android, so expect to see it in 2011. They've been doing this. I think they've already got one out for the iPhone and iPod Touch and iPad, if I'm not mistaken. So Android's a little behind on it, but I would expect them to, whatever they release, I would expect to be fully functional and comparatively competitive with the other platforms out there, and again, this is really the only way you can watch video in many different formats on not only Linux, but OS X and Windows as well. I mean, all of the vendors out there, they don't give you a lot of out-of-the-box support. You get really great support for the vendor-supported video and audio formats, but outside of that, there's not a lot out there, and that's where VLC really steps in and fills in that void. So good stuff. By all means, check it out. From TechCrunch, I saw this article. It's actually a YouTube video, and it's footage of Android's revamped music player. Now, I'm not real familiar with Android's music player because I don't actually own any Android devices, but the post here points out, earlier this week, some folks over at the XDA Developers Forum got their hands on a leaked test build of a revamped Android music player that could possibly be shipping with Android's next OS upgrade, Honeycomb. This evening, the footage was spotted by Engadget, and now the word is spreading like wildfire. Android is going to get a default music player that isn't totally mediocre. So if you're a heavy Android user and you hate their music player, this may be it. Otherwise, use VLC. Win-win. From ZDNet, over in the Linux and open source blog, Stephen J. Von Nichols and Paula Rooney have, actually Stephen J. Von Nichols wrote this article, 2010's Top 5 Linux and Open Source Stories. I thought I would share this with you because these actually are fairly large stories. They generated a lot of buzz and a lot of commentary, and he hits the nail right on the head, in my opinion, on many of what he points out in this article. The first story he points out is Chrome OS finally arrives. I totally agree with him. That's a huge win. How long has been Google working on this? It's like, come on, can we please? You're worse than Microsoft sometimes. Get it out the door already. But very cool. Red Hat, the first billion-dollar open source company, is his second story. Again, awesome stuff. Very true. The third story he has, Oracle remakes Sun's open source legacy. I don't know. I'm a little wishy-washy on it. He's got some good reasoning and, definitely moves that Oracle made. I'm not necessarily sure that they remake anything, but everybody's entitled to their opinion. For Attachmate buys Novell, he positions this as a bunch of Microsoft posturing. I could not agree more. And 5, Ubuntu tries to revitalize the Linux desktop. Again, I could not agree more. Ubuntu is one of my favorite Linux distributions, and I love the user interface. Of course, this is coming from a guy who uses a Mac on a daily basis, but it's not for, and he points this out in his paragraphs underneath. Ubuntu, the newest interface for Ubuntu, is not for the diehard Linux users. Okay, what Linux has needed for the longest time, and I would see this time and time again, where someone just hates Windows and they just want to get off Windows, and so they go and they try Linux, and then next thing you know, they're using a Mac. What happened there? I mean, it was just like, what? And so Ubuntu very much is, in my opinion, with their latest moves, posturing to avoid and then next thing you know, they're using a Mac part because, they try Linux and they go, oh my God, getting Linux on my desktop, this is painful. The transition from Windows to Linux tends to be a little harsh. And you know, the transition from Windows to OS 10, while you still have to make some changes, it's considerably less harsh. And so I can see Ubuntu trying to get in there in the middle to, you know, stop the, you know, to retain the Linux part and stop the bleed to OS 10. I mean, I know a lot of people that's literally what happened. They go, and when you ask them, they're like, well, you know, I like OS 10 and, you know, it's effectively Linux under the hood. And that's how they view it. So Ubuntu, I can totally see, is trying to stem that bleed off to OS 10 and keep those users actually in Linux land. So kudos to them. That's about it for this episode of Linux News Log. As always, everything we've talked about is linked up in the show notes. Visit us on the web, linux.quicksurf.com. Everything I've talked about is linked up. There's a variety of ways to get a hold of me. Follow me over at twitter.com/Adrian_Bacon. And with that, I will see all of you on the next episode. See you next year. Bye.